What's going on, guys? NealGuides here. Welcome back to another tactics video. Tactics that I always tested but just never released. We're going to go through a lot of unreleased tactics that maybe just didn't make the cut. You know, when, for example, this was a very good tactic, but maybe the 5-3-2 was better, or maybe, for example, it was a 4-2-1-3 at that point where the video needed to be made. So a lot of these tactics, they all still work. I've tested them all out, but maybe they've been now pushed to the back, should I say. So I have a list of them here, so I thought I'd just go through all the unreleased tactics that I didn't release, but are still good enough and worth playing, as this is coming towards the end of the year right now. So this is the 5-2-1-2. If you remember, 5-2-1-2 was really the most effective back in FIFA 19. That's when it was really, because these players were unmarked with hug the sidelines. Unfortunately, you can't do that anymore. So I was trying to kind of create a 3-4-1-2. When I was trying to do a 3-5-2, I was looking at different options, looking at a 5-back option, because as we know, the 3-back formations are basically redundant because the left mids and right mids, they can't come back defensively. So you're basically screwed once your opponent has the ball outside your box, rotating the ball around when you're then sat deep. So in out of possession, that was really a destroyer of the 3-backs. But the 5-back, the real benefit is, of course, you can defend in that 5-back and you can also attack. Another reason why there's kind of been on the, I was going to say bit on the back burner, but maybe that's not the correct way of putting it. I didn't really release it after this because when the patch came out in January, the issue was CDMs. I think a lot of people at that time couldn't defend, and I knew if I released this tactic, people are just going to say the tactic was bad when really they just couldn't defend. And that's why I had to go more towards 2 CDMs, and now you're seeing why 2 CDMs are so effective. But 2 center mids on box to box, I think with the pluses nowadays, they do a bit of everything. Just ignore Wanyeri there. I just made it, I'm just making this in another, there should be someone else, but just ignore him being out of position there. 2 box to boxes, they help both equally in attack and defense, but you could of course always put one of these players on holding, so you got a bit of a balance. At least you got one player, and then you have one player kind of doing a bit of everything, going back and forward, but you have one player sitting, almost protecting your back 3 as well. But I did experiment with ball playing defender. I was experimenting with that some time ago, not too long ago. But I think realistically speaking, it's probably just a bit too much. I think defend, as I said, from the first 2 weeks. The other ones are just a bit too aggressive, a bit too attacking. Only you will know. If you really want to use it, you can do, but I think when you lose, if you're that, don't forget, most goals are conceded when you're building up and you lose the ball in your half. Not just in FC, but also in real life, if you look at the stats as well. But in FC, it's worse because there's one mind controlling one player and you can only control one player. So when you lose the ball, your left back, right back, they push up and then you're broken in behind with 2 centre backs. And if you've got a ball playing centre back as well, they sit even higher, and then you're isolated sometimes in a 2v1 or at the very least a 1v1 with your opponent. So when I mean 2v1 in your opponent's favor. So that's something why I kind of steered away from ball playing centre backs and keeping the goalkeeper on their set. So that would be the 3 backs. You do need pacey players here, players that are quick and that can recover. That's what's very important here. Players that are very fast, because they need to cover for both the left back and a right back when they're out of position. And you got to bear in mind, there's no CDM, so you can't use a CDM that drops in between the centre backs either. For the left back and the right back, we've got attacking wing back. That is the best movement that you could possibly get. You could even put one of these on balance. So what you could do, by the way, it's a bit annoying. You have to go all the way back to your defensive line to switch over. But you could put one of these on a wing back to be a bit more conservative, or you could put one on a wing back balance. And that way, the side you attack down the most, you want to put this on attack. I would recommend you do need counter attack for this. But yeah, the side that you attack on the most, is that the one that you can concentrate on. But otherwise, I would say attack your wing back for both. You do need a plus. Again, just ignore Kadioglu. But ideally, you want a plus here, because when you get the ball back, you want these players to surge forward. So when you win the ball back and you've gone from this shape without the ball and you win the ball back, whether you turn over possession or you're just building up from the goalkeeper, you want these guys to fly forward. And that is why we put counter attack. Kind of think of it like the old school long ball from the previous years. That is why we put counter attack for both of these players. That's something just to bear in mind. And the plus, think of it like the work rate. So the plus, think of it like high. Maybe not the best way of describing it, but let's say, for example, if a player can come back in 5 seconds time, That's the earliest they can come back. And let's say without the plus plus, they come back to, let's say, 10 seconds. And let's say with just one singular plus, it's 7 seconds. So for the fastest transition, probably the best way of describing it, both with the ball returning to defensive state and defensive state returning to attacking phase, I would say the plus plus is what's really needed, especially at this time of the year when your opponents have got. Don't forget, people have got faster wingers now, so you got to be even more careful. You need here ideally 95 sprint speed. I'm not gonna lie, 95 sprint speed, good attacking awareness. If you done the jack of all trades evolution, which this video is probably going to be coming out on that day actually, so recording this on the day before, you could definitely release that out as well. With the jack of all trades, actually should have already have come out, so a day later, should I say rather. Now for the cam, one thing you got to bear in mind is when you use this formation, you need to use this alongside another formation. This is not really a formation to play the entire game with. You need that bit of balance. You can use Shadow Strike, and that is what I personally like, but defensively, you're pretty much stuck because out of possession, you got to wait for these players to come back. These are center mids, and then these players kind of sit too forward in front. So in between your center mids and your cam and your left striker and right striker, this is the area that you can say your opponent can effectively nullify. Sometimes that gap is too great with Shadow Striker. That's why Playmaker is probably the better one. And maybe there's even an argument for Classic 10. When I test this tactic out, to be honest, I did not use Classic 10, but you don't need to be a genius to figure out it could work as well. But again, Classic 10, similar to Shadow Striker, they stay forward, and I'd rather prefer a Shadow Striker than a Classic 10. But I can understand if you want that cam just to basically be there, always stay there, and be on that stay forward. But otherwise, for most of you guys, I think trying it out first, I would recommend Playmaker, because at least this way they can help. And let's say you're in a situation where your center mids are sitting, you could always bring back your cam. I remember like the old days, my 3-5-2 that will defend in a 5-3-1-1. You can't do those things anymore. I really dislike the new tactic system because it's something that I used to love doing. Unfortunately, you're quite restricted in what you can do. You can't attack in a 3-5-2 and defend in a 4-4-2. You can't make a centre back going forward. You just can't. And that's why I feel this system this year is more restrictive. Although, let's be honest, albeit this is the first year, I kind of expected a bit more movement, but hopefully next year going forward, we have a better system. And then advanced forward and poacher, or you can use 2 on advanced forward, or even 2 on poacher. It's completely up to you. As I always say, I like a mix of both. 2 different types of movements. It just helps me because sometimes, I'm not, when I'm rotating a ball, I'm not always triggering the striker. Sometimes the striker makes a run themselves and I can trigger them manually. But this is what works very well. For the tactics, 5-2-1-2, build up style, we have it on counter, I think is needed. And the defensive approach, where I tested this, it was 55 depth. What I would say for now is you can use 70, but I think it's a bit risky. I think the more formations that are a bit more overly attacking, I would say be a bit careful, because when you're out of possession, number one, you're pressing with a 3-1-2. You haven't got a full 4-4-2, so you're not going to be pressing as well. If your opponent holds the ball in these areas, you as yourself as a player manually has to go and then move those left centimeters, right centimeters out wide to go and press the ball. Of course, you could always commit, for example, a right wing back going forward, but then of course, at that point, you're then taking a risk of then creating a gap for your opponent's striker to run down or winger to run down. So from a pressing standpoint, this is not really a formation you would use to press the ball. And that's why I say you need to combine this ideally with a 4-4-2 and then a 4-2-1-3 or 4-2-3-1. Just so you got to... I was going to think of another word, but let me just keep it simple. Balance. I was trying to think of something. I don't know what I was thinking of. Unnecessarily complicating it, but yeah, look, just a bit of balance. That way you have, for one phase, you have the 4-4-2, and then let's say for one to close out the game, you can have this phase, or you can move to even a 5-3-2, because that way you have 2 CDMs as well. And then we've got the count and the balance, and that's why I said balance, because you can't press as well with this formation. You kind of don't want your players to be committing too much, because you could also get destroyed on the counter when you get turned over. So that's also something you have to always bear in mind when you're doing a system like this. Now, for the player strikers, you can go with 1 tall, 1 medium striker. The height's not really the end of the world here. But you want someone that can maneuver on the ball. So at the very least, someone that's small, agile. I got Son, who's not really a tall player, but in my eyes, he's a bit tall. I did evolution. This is recorded on my second account. So with Son here, move behind the camera, you can see he's a bit tall and he's pretty good as well. Dembele the cam, someone that could do a bit of everything. You've got tiki-taka play style. Someone like Ranieri would be a perfect example of playing that role. Someone that can do a bit of everything. The centre mid, that's on holding. If they're on box to box, 2 centre mids is fine. If it's a play on holding, ideally someone with good sprint speed, high defensive, like I'm talking about 90 sprint speed at this stage of the game, 88 defensive awareness, and good passing, good distribution. This would be the person that's going to be holding effectively the defense together, the whole defensive line. Don't forget, they're not a CDM, they're centre mid, so they naturally sit higher than as opposed to a CDM, which will sit a bit deeper. So you got to bear in mind the biggest weakness I would say with this formation is, let's say you're attacking, you lose the ball, and let's say you don't win the ball in that segment, and that's why I understand why people would like to use high. But when you're then stuck in a system where you're sitting and your opponent's holding the ball and you're trying to break out and trying to win the ball back, your opponent can distribute the ball and break you between your center mids and your back line. And that is why I think the 5-3-2, and that's why I released, well, if you were part of the Patreon, the 5-3-2 actually released in November. But for the masses, we're probably going to release it. Well, I think we kind of gave you a bit of a hint, but we'll release now. But that is why I've even talked about the 5-3-2 instead. Just that one CDM provides stability, and you solidify at least your defensive line. And that is why when we did the weekly tests, I believe 3 weeks ago, we added the 3-5-2 in, if I'm not mistaken, and we released it there. But I would say the 5-2-1-2 still very, very good. I think let me just read my notes. I think that is everything. I think that I really missed that. But yeah, I would say definitely give it a try. Look, it's a very attacking formation. I think honestly, if you have an account, or let's say you're an elite level player, but you're playing in Division 3, Division 4, this is really a fun formation to play. I think using this in combination with another formation together, I think if you have like a one with CDMs, or even a 5-3-2, or even like a 4-2-1-3, the only issue is converting from this to a 4-2-1-3. It's not actually difficult. At this stage of the game, let's go to a 4-2-1-3 actually, because that is what everyone is going towards. Okay, beautiful. So let's say you do something like this, inside forward, like this. The only thing is you have to find a player. Now, I've got Lino. He can technically, if I take the camera off, he can play left wing as well. So if you have 2 center mids that can play CDM, you're pretty much good to go. Then the only thing is you need to find a winger. And I think that's where the jack of all trades come in. In fact, let me just quickly show you this actually over here. It's done on my second channel. We do this a bit unedited, a bit raw. But let me just give you a quick look. Where is it? I'm not even set it up. So just bear with me. There we go. FC25. Beautiful. So we go here. We're going to go to evolutions. We're going to go to jack of all trades. So you can see the most common player is Salah, which I believe he's probably not going to be extinct. But let's just check if he is now. It's actually a day later. That's not the wrong Salah. That's the right one. He's kind of extinct, but not really. But you can see he can play left wing as well, and he can play right back. So that would be where this would prosper, because you could play, for example, a winger here. So let's just say, as an example, we use Lino, right? Lino, and just ignore Son for a second. Then let's assume Son is a left back here, or even a centre back. But then what you could do here is you could easily convert. Or the second option you could probably go with, if you have a CDM that can play centre back as well. I think most people got a left back and a right back that can play centre back as well. But the benefit of that is you can change between any of the 5-back formations, realistically speaking here. But if you're talking about just exclusively a 5-2-1-2, a cam that can, so maybe I should probably go back now. Let's just talk about exclusively a 4-2-1-3 to a 5-2-1-2. Let me just change a little bit here. Someone like a Zola, someone that can play cam and striker. I'm quite fortunate when I've chosen my evolutions that apart from Correa, Son can play the wing positions, Dembele can play cam and striker. Appin can play CDM, centre mid, striker, and cam. So he can play it all the way across the line. So I got these Cadio can play left back, right back. Metal can play CDM, centre mid. Cadiolo can play right back, right wing. So you see, I've got all these very versatile players that can play Newman. But like, let's say you're talking about here, You could use this. So let's say we talk about 4-2-1-3. Cam will be where it is. Let's say you have two center mids that can play CDM as well. That would be perfect. And then ideally you need, for example, here at least a striker here that could play possibly a striker and maybe a right wing position. And then a singular striker by itself is completely fine over here. And then your backline will be fine. If you have someone like Militao, which is perfect, that can play both, as I mentioned, CDM, centre back, and centre mid, it works perfectly. And then the left back and right back, you can keep it the same like that. Or you could go with Lino, someone that could play, as you can see, Lino, as I mentioned to you before, he can play numerous positions and he can play the left wing position as well. So let's say if I go to a 4-2-1-3, he will play here. Let's say Son moves here and Correa moves there. Then you can see we have the 4-2-1-3 system. And then you could see here, I got Kadioglu can play right back. That's completely fine. And left back. And then I got my two centre backs. And Kunde can play right back. So what I could do is move Kadioglu to be the left back over here. And I can move Kunde to be the right back. And then Van der Ven and Militao make the two centre backs. So do you see how in that way I can very easily convert into a 5-2-1-2? And that's why when I did these evolutions, not only did I make sure they were very good players, top tier players, I wanted to make sure they can use different. That's why with this, the way I test out my tactics on my main account, sometimes I test out tactics on my main account. I do sometimes, but a lot of the time that's just understanding gameplay, testing more gameplay features out, depending on what I'm trying to test out. Whereas this account, I kind of do a lot of the formation testing, playing weekend leagues, even casually testing games, sometimes in Division 3. Because this account I don't really use that much. I use it for Division 10 to Elite Division Series. We're back in Division 3 again. So I test out, for example, formations, and you need to test the formation Division 3. You can't test in Elite because you won't get the ball and it'll take you hours to do it. So this is where I normally use to test out a lot of tactics per se and systems in this. So that way it saves me buying the players every single time. So that's why I've done like this. But look, that is the 5-2-1-2. Hope you enjoyed this video. A bit of an unreleased tactic as well. But maybe you might release on my main account very soon. But we'll leave it here exclusive for the NealGuides too to get the tactics early. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. And of course, catch you next time. Peace.